Funding for Inner Compass is provided by Calvin College.
The life that's unfolding,
the world that awaits,
gifts that are yours to explore,
and God's to use.
It's all happening here at Calvin.
Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Shirley Hoogstra. Do you know a high school athlete who also wants a Division I opportunity to play sports? Do they also dream about graduating from that college? And what about the hiring practices on our professional teams, the general managers, the coaches? Our guest today has kept a scorecard on how colleges and professional teams are doing around issues of diversity. Join us on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is author, scholar, and human rights activist Richard Lapchick of the Institute for Diversity and Ethics in Sport at the DeVos Sports Business Management Program at the University of Central Florida. And Richard is a guest of the January series at Calvin College. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
You know, a lot of us have watched the movie Remember the Titans, and Glory Road was just out, and it talks about interracial mixture on sports teams. How have those movies helped you in your work, if at all?
Well, I think, first of all, I know all of the coaches involved.
Oh, do you really?
It's been a treat to see their lives projected to the national audience because they've been in the background for so many years.
Right.
But I think it makes it more real for people. I think if they see it on a big screen, somehow it makes it more believable. I think the danger in the two movies is that people think, well, that's what happened in the 1960s in Virginia, and that's what happened in the 1960s in Texas. It's different now. And of course, it's very different now,
right.
But there's still so many issues out there.
Yeah, what are some of the issues that those movies touched on that still exist today?
Well, one of the movies was talking about the ability of African American players to represent a team. Now, today, as we look at college basketball, 57% of the players are African American, right. Nearly 80% in the NBA, and football figures are close to that. The other picture was about an African American coach having the opportunity to coach, and that is still an issue at the college level more than the pro level.
So we've made a lot of progress in terms of qualified athletes getting onto the teams that they want to be on. But in terms of having the management, the coaching, and maybe even the general managers of some organizations, and even maybe the front office, as we say, that still has the racial divide?
The playing fields are level. The rules are obvious. You're going to win a game based on what you produce on a field, so the coaches are picking the best players,
right.
Irrespective of race or religion or any other factor, who can play the game for us.
Right.
We're not necessarily bringing the best candidates for our coaching jobs, general managers' jobs, into the interview rooms so that the owners or presidents of the university or whoever's making the decision can see all the best people out there.
What are the obstacles to getting the pool of the best candidates?
Well, the obstacles are some people will say, I don't know a group of African American coaches who are qualified or capable. Right. Some fear that African American coaches in Division I football, which is where the major problem is in college sport today, can schmooze with the alumni who are overwhelmingly white.
This is big business.
Donations.
Division I athletics is big business.
Big business, as shown by the signing of Saban in January, that
right.
A $40 million contract,
right.
unheard of in the history of college sport. My dad was the highest paid college coach in the country. He was the highest paid professional basketball player in the country, and he was the highest paid pro coach. And in his 10-year career as the coach of the New York Knicks, when he had the highest winning percentage in the history of the NBA, he cumulatively made what Phil Jackson made in the opening quarter of the Lakers' first game this year.
The opening quarter. Right. So your father's not a millionaire in the $40 million rank. That's right.
My dad passed away in 1970, long before the boom.
Now, when they say there's not a pool, there's sort of a stepping stone, right? A ladder. So you get your first job maybe at a smaller school, and then you go up the ladder and up the ladder. Is that happening for coaches, African-American coaches, or other coaches of color?
It happens in basketball. In basketball, both at the college level and pro level, we don't even notice anymore when an African-American coach is hired, and more importantly, when they're fired.
Okay.
And I think that's the critical component to it. You have to be the people who are going to hire can't fear that if I hire an African American coach and need to fire him, that people are going to accuse me of being racist.
That's right.
So that's got to be a wide open process. Judge them like you would judge anybody else. But in fact, today we have fewer African American head football coaches in college sport than we had 10 years ago. So in that particular sport, things have actually gotten worse. Now, the Black Coaches Association has stepped up and created a hiring report card that evaluates the process.
Okay.
And they're in their 4th year, and we've gone from 3 African American head coaches when they started the report card. There'll be 7 coaches of color coaching Division I teams next year, and we've gone from none in Division 1A to 6 African American head coaches this year. And I think a lot of that is because that report card is forcing the hand of colleges and universities, because they don't want to be embarrassed, to open the process, and suddenly they discovered, hey,
it
this
works.
guy might really be good for us.
Okay, so watchdogging and accountability and transparency, visibility are all assisting this process.
Absolutely.
Okay, and you started that with your report card process. How did that happen? And tell us a little bit about what the report card is and then how you got this idea.
Well, I was writing a book back in the early 1980s, and it was autobiographical about some of the things I'd been involved in and some of my dad's activities on the issue of race in basketball. And the publisher asked me to write a section on the current state of race relations in sport. So I began to compile the data on who are the players and who are the front office people, league office people. And it was published in this book in 1984 called Broken Promises, and Sports Illustrated wrote a critical review saying, why is this guy bringing up these problems? These aren't really problems in sport anymore. We have a fully integrated game. And then in 1987, there was a man called Al Campanis, who was then vice president of the Los Angeles Dodgers, who was brought on Nightline to talk about Jackie Robinson and the impact 40 years later. And when Ted Koppel asked him very casually, why do you think there aren't more black general managers and managers? He said, well, blacks might not have the capabilities and the necessities to do that. And that forced the media then to begin to look at those statistics and realize that they're important. So it was at that point that we started annually publishing this racial and gender report card. Initially just about baseball, basketball, and football, now includes soccer, NHL, college sport, and this year, for the first time, we did it on the 303 Associated Press affiliated newspapers. Yeah,
let's talk a little bit. There's a lot of synergies between these issues. So one of them is, do we have persons of color in the front office, the people who are making policy decisions, the leadership of the teams, not just the players? And then you also talk about the sportscasters and newspapers and editors who are writing about athletes and also probably writing about coaches and the general managers. In your research, I found that there's this racism piece perhaps in that as well, correct?
Well, whether or not it's racism, the fact is that nearly 90% of the sports editors, deputy sports editors, columnists, and beat reporters on the specific sports on our newspapers are white and overwhelmingly white men.
Right.
So with the increase of women playing sport, with the increase of African Americans playing sport, the question is raised, are they prepared to go deeper to look at a particular issue? And the story that always pops out for me was one of my favorite writers was a man named Ralph Wiley, who passed away at age 51 a couple of years ago. But he was writing a Sports Illustrated cover story on Rocket Ismail when he was at Notre Dame. And the story was going to be about this great player who was going to be a great pro player, and it was all. And Ralph, who was African American, became friends with the player and got to know the family. And it was about an hour from deadline. And he said that the only thing that bothered him was the mom. He said the mother was a woman from the Sudan, but something troubled him. And just as they were about to go to press, the mother calls and says, this is after months of doing the story.
Right.
I feel terrible that I've deceived you and the public all these years. I want you to know that I'm really not from Sudan, and I'm not a Muslim. I'm an African-American woman from Detroit.
Wow.
And I was afraid when my 3 children were born that they would face racism every day of their lives if they were simply African-Americans. So I made them into Africans, thinking they might be treated a little bit better.
Right.
So the editors of Sports Illustrated said, that has to be the story about the fraud of the mother. And Ralph said, I don't know how I'm going to write this, but I want some more time.
Right.
And he wrote it about that perspective, about racism in America, causing a woman to change her identity to protect her children. I'm not sure a white writer would have gone that far.
Or wouldn't have had the trust, right?
The woman wouldn't have talked to him.
No,
That's right.
I mean, I have chills when you tell me that story because it tells you the depth of the fear around racism, the lived out experience of parents and children around racism, something they live in and out of every day. And so the fact that this was a person who could share their experience and maybe was able to gain more trust or credibility, you have honesty and a transparency in that story that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
That's right.
So it's not just about looking right? It's not just a political correctness of, hey, let's get the ratios right because that's the right way to do it. It's about better reporting. It's about better information for us when that happens. That's a very compelling reason why you want diversity in really every area of life, and you're bringing it up in the sports area. Do you think that people are not helping, I want to say, sort of if you're interested in sports, you might want to become a sports writer. If you're good at writing, you might want to become a sports writer. If you like journalism, you might want to become a sports writer. Is there a connection between our athletes not graduating and not then getting the professional opportunities to be sports writers and editors? Is there any connection there, you think?
Well, I think the disconnect comes from the fact that it's not just athletes who are going to be the writers. It's not athletes who are going to hold those front office positions.
Right.
There are so many people who love sport in America. I mean, from my point of view, it's the broadest common cultural denominator we have in our society. People talk sports, think sports.
Yes, right.
It's a way to socialize with people.
Common denominator.
And, I could assure you, because that's one of the things we found with this new DeVos Sports Business Management program at the University of Central Florida, that I'm getting applicants from people who are in the insurance industry, people who are accountants, people who were doing regular business work, having graduated with business degrees, but weren't happy. They love sports, saw this as an opportunity. So it's not just athletes who are going to come into it, but those graduation rates for athletes who might enter the field clearly play a role in their ability to get those front office jobs, to get jobs as broadcasters and journalists.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit. Why don't you give us the statistics? It's getting better. So our athletes of color and general athletes are graduating, but they're not graduating at the same rates, are they, as other students?
They're not. There's been a tremendous increase. We've changed the way we measure graduation rates. First of all, in the old standard, if an athlete came to Calvin College and transferred out and went to Hope or whatever college, Calvin College would have that person count as a negative in their graduation rates. If somebody transferred in from a community college to Calvin and graduated, they wouldn't count them as a graduate. If somebody came back 6 years later and got their degree, they wouldn't count as a graduate. So those things are now changed in what they call the graduation success rates. So there's been a quantum leap in improvement, some of which is new, but a lot of it would have been the same, would have changed if we had measured it that way in the past. But the disparity still exists between black and white student athletes. There's almost a 20% gap between African American student athletes and white student athletes across the board. Pick your sport, pick your team, pick men or women. The gap is there, and I think that's what the goal is, to try to close that so that we're bringing in students who will be competitive and can play against each other, not only on the court, but compete against each other in the classroom as well.
But you've written about the fact that there's a number of reasons why this is happening, and I think one of your articles was sort of who is to blame for this problem, and you spread it out in a number of ways, and you talk about the fact that colleges, institutions themselves, didn't have the priority of getting these students not only to play well, but to graduate. And you also put some of the responsibility on the players. But you also fairly globally say that it's really our national government, our state governments that have not supported education sufficiently. I thought that was a fairly idealistic place to put the blame, but you were trying to get at it from a much more systemic place, weren't you?
Well, I was trying to say that, the typical response of people is point the finger at the coach, at the athletic director, maybe at the university president.
Yeah.
But it goes down to the high schools. It goes down to the parents overemphasizing, living the dream
Right.
that their kid might play in the NBA or play in, even get a college scholarship so they won't have to worry about tuition.
Right.
You know, there's so many people dreaming the dream at the high school level, but 1 out of 100 high school basketball players will ever play in college. 1 out of 10,000 will ever play in the NBA.
Yeah, so it's 1 out of 100 that will get to play out of all of the athletes that are playing today will get to college on a scholarship.
That's right.
And then 1 out of 10,000 gets into a professional team
In basketball.
in
yeah.
basketball.
It's a slightly better, but not much. In,
Right.
in
Those
the
are
other
big.
sport.
Those are lottery odds.
Those are lottery
Right,
odds,
right.
and so many people bet their futures. They let everything go to
Right.
help their kid because they think it's the best for them. And there are high school teachers who think the same thing. Oh, I'm going
Right.
to do him a favor. I'm going to let him pass this course,
Right.
so he stays eligible, so he'll get the college scholarship, so the pro scouts will see him.
Right, right.
They all think they're helping,
Right.
But
It's a ticket out.
But in fact, they're setting that person up in some ways for the disaster that happens when they don't get the degree and don't make the pros, and they come back to their communities as double failures.
Right. It's a lifelong handicap if you don't have your education.
Exactly.
And you're saying that if we could get better schooling for students right off the bat, that we could care more about them right off the bat. If we had better funding, have teachers stay in the schools where this high-risk, perhaps, population exists, that we would have a better result on the college level and therefore life level.
And this discussion of salaries in sport,
Right.
to bring it back to this particular issue, you know, we're talking about college coaches averaging a couple of $1 million each. That number just went up dramatically this year at the highest levels of of football and basketball. College tripling, quadrupling sometimes the presidential salary on those campuses, but those salaries could pay for literally dozens of professors or graduate assistantships or
Tutors.
It's
support,
perspective.
right.
It's all about perspective.
But our culture is somehow, I think you're saying, out of whack about the value that this brings us. So what is it about the entertainment value of athletics that we are willing to turn a blind eye to the spiraling costs that's happening? What is it?
Well, I think as a society, we're fascinated by it. We're, fascinated by the Donald Trumps of the world. I can't tell you how many business students in the College of Business at the University of Central Florida watch The Apprentice,
Right.
And are fascinated by the process. And
Right. And that's a lottery odds kind of thing too.
it sure
Right.
is. And but it's live the dream through somebody else, because
Right.
maybe it could be me someday.
Do you think it's also the fantasy of it's the Cinderella story in some ways for at least for male athletes? You get picked out, you're kind of a nobody, and all of a sudden you're a millionaire, and you have all of the illusionary, I'm going to call them illusionary benefits of being a celebrity. And some people think, like you say, I wish that could be me. So I'm going to live my life through these folks.
Well, the illusion is from the mind of the public, not an illusion. I mean, I can't tell you. I speak on lots of college campuses and in corporate settings, and so many people who aren't athletes wished they were.
Right.
They talk about the time that they met whoever it happened to be.
Right.
I've talked to CEOs of major Fortune 500 companies who will relate stories of their lives as one of the highlights when they met Muhammad Ali or whoever it happens to be. And I am friends with Muhammad Ali. I love being around him, but these guys would meet him casually once.
Right. And it still was a highlight of their life.
Yeah.
Right. So it's the association with fame that draws us as human beings as well.
I think that has a lot to do with it.
One of the pieces of that, though, is you talk about in education that we're missing out on helping these athletes become well educated. What are we doing about their characters? And what are we doing about the human character of our nation if being attached with celebrity becomes such a priority? What does that say about where we find value in our lives and values for others? It doesn't seem like it's very deep.
Well, I think that we read so much about athletes who get in trouble with the law.
Right.
100 athletes a year for the last decade have been involved in sexual assault.
Right.
60 to 80 a year for the past decade have been arrested for some kind of drug violation.
Right.
We read about athletes with guns. We read about athletes not graduating.
Right.
And it makes us feel that athletes have a specific problem. Maybe they feel they are above the law.
Right.
The reality is that in our society, 800,000 women are raped every year.
Right.
4.5 million are battered every year. Athletes are part of the problem, but they're certainly not the problem. 2.1 million heroin addicts, 1.9 million cocaine addicts in America. Those numbers about athletes, because we read about them so often, make us think that it's an athletics problem. We're talking about a society where 67% of our children admitted on a survey that they cheated at least twice on a high school exam last year.
Right.
That nearly 100% lie to their parents to protect their parents from what they're doing in their lives. 25% of high school students stole something. It's about a character issue in a society there where we read about the Enrons and the corporate scandals, where we read about scandals in sports or in politics, that you have to wonder what values we're teaching our children overall. And I think we can teach tremendous values in sport if we do it right.
In fact, your statistics would say that persons involved in sports are on the minuscule end of that criminal behavior.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
So in fact, the opposite message is true, that being involved in sports might enhance your character or your ability to be a good citizen and be a performer.
It's totally true, and I think the most important value you can get from sport, among lots of them, is, and that's not to say that I don't want to be critical of sport where it needs to be, because I've spent a lot of time doing that. But, we're talking about players who come into what I consider to be the miracle of sport in the huddle.
Okay.
When you get inside that huddle, it doesn't matter if you're white or African American or Latino or Asian American or Native American or Arab American. It doesn't matter if you're Protestant, Catholic, Jew, Buddhist, Sikh, Hindu, or Muslim. It doesn't matter if you're young or old. If you don't pull together to win, the team's not going to win.
Right.
Well, if we can teach that value in the classroom, in corporate America, and whatever part of society we all operate in, it's that unique gift that we have in sport that I think we can give to our society.
So it's the ability to analyze it and then replicate it in other places. So what you're saying, if it can be the great equalizer and unifier, and isn't that what we need in the world today? I mean, some ability to unify around differences, but for a common goal. And
for
in
that
sport,
common goal, teamwork works.
Yeah. I want to touch back on a comment you were saying about how we write about athletes, so when they have a problem, it gets press. You noticed in your research that the way in which African American athletes were described and the way in which white athletes were described was different. And one of the ways in which that was different is that the African American athletes were always described by their physical prowess, and the white athletes had more intellectual. Why do you think that happens?
Well, I think it happened because of kind of stereotypes that we are all raised in. I think African Americans have stereotypes about whites just like whites have stereotypes about African Americans, and pick your ethnic group or racial group. We all have those images. And the image in our society for generation after generation has been that African Americans have great physical capabilities but aren't intellectual, and the white people have intellect and leadership skills. So that historically played itself out in decisions on who's hired, but also on how people write about it. I think that's changed a lot. I think people have pointed that out to broadcasters and writers, and that particular thing has gotten a lot better. You don't see that very often.
So there is a subconscious thing going on, or just even a habit going on, an unexamined habit. But when your writing and other people's writings brought that to their attention, they could change it.
Well, I think the media has a tremendous role to play because they inform us. They make us aware of what they think is important to be aware of.
And we are shaped by that.
No question. And so to this extent that they become more sensitive to these issues, to report more on the disparity in graduation rates, the disparity in hiring practices, it's going to bring pressure on the people who can affect those changes.
Well, see, even as a fan, and you mentioned that some of this blame goes to the fans as well. Let's be a little less, let's be more discerning, and let's examine it more, and let's say to the coaches in the schools, look, I don't like to support a team where this kind of thing happens. It feels fake to me. It feels like, in fact, you're giving me a bad product when that happens. It affects my respect for your team. So by your work and publishing that kind of work, we as fans can actually be part of the solution, can't we?
Oh, fans are the ultimate pressure point. Fans and athletes. If the athletes say they're not going to tolerate something and really stand together, then they'll have a tremendous influence on athletic departments and owners of teams. If fans say, I'm not going to tolerate this, alumni, then the pressure is going to be there to do it right. And, you can see schools that do it right.
Right.
And, win big time, and everybody admires them.
Right.
And then they should be the model for, other schools that maybe aren't doing it as well, or teams that aren't doing it as well. We're blessed to have this association with Rich DeVos and the Orlando Magic with the DeVos program. And the Magic are in the community all the time, doing great things in the community. I went with them to Baton Rouge a week after Katrina, and you could see in those shelters that we visited that the power, the people were, every image you saw on television, listless, lifeless, hopeless. And they saw people from the Orlando Magic, not even their team, walk into the room, and they were up there at the front of the room. It was magical.
Wow. My guest today has been sports ethicist Richard Lapchick of the DeVos Sports Business Management program at the University of Central Florida. I'm Shirley Hoogstra, and thank you for watching Inner Compass.